I stared at my phone, reading the text message for the fifth time, my hands trembling slightly. I know what you're hiding, Marin. We should talk before Everett finds out. My mother-in-law's words glowed accusingly on the screen. My name is Marin, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought the worst thing about my relationship with my mother-in-law was her constant reminders about my food allergies. You know, the subtle jabs about how complicated I make family dinners, or how Everett's ex-girlfriend Camille could eat anything without making a fuss. I was standing in our kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows, when the message arrived. The coffee I'd been sipping turned bitter in my mouth. What could Lorna possibly think she knew about me? I'd always been an open book, sometimes to a fault. Hey, beautiful. Everett's voice made me jump. I quickly locked my phone and set it face down on the counter. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, and I forced myself to relax into his embrace. You okay? You seem tense. Just your mom being? Your mom, I said, trying to keep my voice light. She wants to talk. Everett's arms stiffened slightly. What about? She didn't say. The lie felt heavy on my tongue, but I needed time to figure this out. Probably another lecture about cross-contamination in her kitchen. He sighed, his breath warm against my neck. I'll talk to her again about the allergy thing. She needs to understand it's not a choice you're making to be difficult. If only that were the real issue. I turned in his arms, studying his face, the kind eyes, the slight worry line between his brows that appeared whenever his mother came up in conversation. Remember when we first started dating, and you told me your mom was a bit protective? He laughed. Understatement of the century? Just a bit. I managed to smile, but my mind was racing. What could Lorna possibly think she had on me? I never cheated, never lied about anything important. The only secret I kept was, but no, she couldn't know about that. Nobody knew about that. My phone buzzed again. Everett reached for it, but I snatched it first. Sorry, probably work, I said, stepping away. His expression flickered with confusion at my sudden movement. Another message from Lorna. I'm coming over this afternoon. We can discuss the photo I found while cleaning out the attic. My blood ran cold. The attic, where Walter, my father-in-law, had stored boxes of old family photos, including ones from before I met Everett. Before I changed my name. Before I became the person I am today. I need to run some errands, I said quickly, already grabbing my purse. I'll pick up dinner on my way home? Marin? Everett's voice stopped me at the door. You'd tell me if something was really wrong, right? I looked back at my husband, the man who'd loved me unconditionally for the past 5 years, who'd chosen me despite his mother's constant comparisons to perfect Camille, who didn't know that the woman he married had reinvented herself long before we met. Of course, I lied again, hating myself for it. Everything's fine. As I drove away, my phone kept buzzing with messages I couldn't bear to read. Lorna had finally found the ammunition she'd been looking for since the day Everett brought me home. The question was, what would she do with it? The truth about my past wasn't just my secret to keep, it was my survival story. And I'd be damned if I'd let Lorna twist it into something ugly. But first, I needed to know exactly what she'd found in that attic. I pulled into Lorna and Walter's driveway, my heart pounding against my ribs. The familiar colonial house loomed before me, its pristine white exterior masking the tension that always lurked inside. I'd driven here instead of running errands, knowing I needed to face this head-on. Walter's truck wasn't in the driveway, small mercies. At least I'd only have to deal with Lorna. Before I could reach the front door, it swung open. Lorna stood there in her perfectly pressed slacks and cashmere sweater, a manila envelope in her hands. I wasn't expecting you so soon, she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. But I'm glad you came. The formal living room felt cold despite the summer heat outside. Family photos lined the walls, dozens of them tracking Everett's life. I noticed, not for the first time, how many included Camille. 8 years of dating captured in frozen moments, while my 5 years of marriage warranted only 2 frames. Would you like some tea? Lorna asked, already moving toward the kitchen. I bought those special allergen-free cookies you can eat. Though I suppose that was unnecessary, wasn't it? My stomach clenched. What exactly do you think you know, Lorna? She set the envelope on the coffee table between us. I was cleaning the attic last weekend. Walter's been after me for months to organize all those old boxes. She paused, studying my face. I found something interesting in his old case files. Walter's career as a private investigator. Of course. I should have known he'd have access to that kind of information. Whatever you found. Sarah Mitchell, Lorna said quietly, and my world tilted. That was your name before, wasn't it? Before you became Maren Collins. I heard voices in the foyer, Walter's deep rumble and, to my horror, Everett's familiar tone. My hands started shaking. Mom, Everett called out. Your car's not in the garage, but the door was open. He stopped short in the living room doorway, Walter right behind him. Maren, what are you doing here? Perfect timing, Lorna said, reaching for the envelope. We were just about to look at some interesting photographs. Walter stepped forward, his face darkening. Lorna, don't. She's been lying to our son for years, Walter. He deserves to know who he really married. Mom, what are you talking about? Everett moved to stand beside my chair, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder. I stood up, shrugging off his touch. I can explain. Can you? Lorna pulled out a newspaper clipping. Can you explain why Sarah Mitchell disappeared 10 years ago, right after her father's arrest for running a Ponzi scheme that ruined hundreds of lives? Or why she emerged 3 years later as Maren Collins, with a convenient list of life-threatening allergies that make her seem so fragile and in need of protection? That's enough, Walter snapped, but the damage was done. Everett stared at me, his face unreadable. Maren, I changed my name legally, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I didn't do anything wrong. My father did terrible things, yes, but I helped the investigation. I'm the one who turned him in. After taking your share? Lorna pressed. The money that disappeared with Sarah Mitchell was returned to the victims. Walter cut in. All of it. I know because I worked the case. He turned to his wife, disgust evident in his expression. Which you knew when you found my files. You just chose to leave that part out. The silence that followed was deafening. Everett hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. I couldn't bear to look at him. I think, Walter said quietly, you should leave, Lorna.
Take a drive.
Think about what you're doing to this family. I'm protecting this family, she insisted, but her voice wavered. No. Everett finally spoke, his tone ice cold. You're destroying it. And if you ever try to hurt Maren again, you'll lose me too. I felt his hand slip into mine, warm and steady. But as we walked out together, leaving Lorna standing alone in her perfect living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She'd exposed my past, yes, but she didn't know everything. And the parts she didn't know? Those were the ones that could really tear this family apart. The next morning, I found Walter sitting alone at the local diner, nursing a cup of coffee. He didn't seem surprised when I slid into the booth across from him. The breakfast crowd's chatter provided a buffer of white noise around us, making it feel safer to talk. You knew, I said quietly. All this time, you knew who I was. He pushed a manila folder across the table, different from the one Lorna had yesterday. I kept copies of everything. Figured this day might come. He paused as the waitress refilled his cup. What Lorna doesn't know is that I've been watching her, too. I opened the folder and froze. Inside was a photo of Lorna having lunch with Camille, dated just last week. She's still in contact with her? More than that. Walter's face was grim. They've been plotting. Lorna's been feeding Camille information about your marriage, your medical conditions. They're trying to prove your allergies are fake. My hands started trembling. Why are you showing me this? Because my wife is about to do something stupid. He pulled out another document. She's hired a private investigator, not me, obviously, to dig deeper into your past. But she's not going to find what she thinks she will, is she? I stared at my reflection in the window, remembering the scared 19-year-old girl who discovered her father's crimes.
No.
She won't. The money that disappeared? Walter's voice was gentle. The part she thinks you stole? I know where it really went. I know what you did with it. You never told her? Wasn't my story to tell. He leaned forward. But maybe it's time you did. Before she does more damage trying to protect Everett from a threat that doesn't exist. My phone buzzed, a text from Everett. Mom just showed up at the house. Says she needs to talk to both of us. Where are you? She's moving faster than I thought, Walter muttered, reading the message over my shoulder. Marin, listen to me. Lorna's not just afraid of losing Everett. She's afraid of losing her identity as his protector. After what happened with Camille. What had happened with Camille? I asked. Everyone tiptoes around it, but nobody ever tells me the whole story. Walter's expression darkened. Camille nearly bankrupted Everett. Convinced him to invest in her brother's business venture. It was a scam, but she claimed she didn't know. Lorna had to remortgage their house to help him recover. That's why she's so paranoid about me being another con artist? I laughed bitterly. Ironic, considering my background. The difference is you exposed the con. You didn't profit from it. He pulled out one final document, a newspaper article I'd never seen before. It detailed how an anonymous source had helped return millions to the victims of my father's scheme. You gave up your inheritance to make things right.
My phone buzzed again.
Everett. Mom's saying something about proof. Please come home. I stood up, gathering the documents. I need to go. Marin. Walter caught my arm. There's something else you should know. About why Lorna's so fixated on Camille. He hesitated. Camille's pregnant. And she's claiming it's Everett's. The world tilted sideways. That's impossible. They haven't been together in years. I know. But Lorna wants to believe it. Because if it's true, then she has a reason to push me out completely. I felt oddly calm, despite the bomb that had just been dropped. When did Camille tell her this? Yesterday morning, right before Lorna found my old case files about you. He gave me a meaningful look. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? I thought about the pregnancy test hidden in my bathroom drawer, the one I'd been too afraid to take, about how everything was about to get infinitely more complicated. Thank you, Walter, I said, already heading for the door, for showing me what I'm really up against. What are you going to do? I paused, thinking about the other secrets I'd been keeping, the ones that could either save my marriage or destroy it completely. I'm going to tell my husband the whole truth, before his mother and ex-girlfriend can twist it into something else. I sat in my car outside our house, staring at the pregnancy test I'd finally taken in the diner's bathroom. 2 pink lines.
Clear as day.
The irony of this timing wasn't lost on me, my news versus Camille's claim. But first, I had to deal with whatever scene was waiting inside. Lorna's Mercedes was parked in our driveway, looking as pristine and polished as its owner always did. Through the living room window, I could see her gesturing animatedly while Everett sat with his head in his hands. The moment I walked in, Lorna's voice cut through the tension. Finally. Now we can discuss Camille's situation like adults. There is no situation, Everett said, standing up. Camille and I haven't been together in years. This is ridiculous. She says differently. Lorna pulled out her phone. She has proof of a meeting 3 months ago. My hand instinctively went to my stomach, but I forced it back down. Let me guess, at the Cardinal Hotel bar? They both turned to look at me. Everett's face showed confusion, Lorna's triumph. How did you know that? She asked. I pulled out my own phone, finding the photo Walter had given me. Because I know about your weekly lunches with Camille. I know you've been plotting this together. I turned to Everett. 3 months ago, your mother arranged for Camille to accidentally run into you at that bar. But you never showed up, did you? I was with you, he said slowly. We were at the hospital. Your allergic reaction to the new medication, which your mother knew about, I added. She knew exactly where you'd be that night, just like she knows my entire medical history now, thanks to the private investigator she hired. Lorna's face paled slightly. How did you? Walter told me everything. I placed the folder of documents on the coffee table, including what really happened with Camille and the investment scam. That's not relevant, Lorna snapped. It's completely relevant. I took a deep breath. Because you're so afraid of history repeating itself that you can't see what's really happening. Camille's lying about the pregnancy, Lorna. just like she lied about not knowing her brother's business was a scam. Everett picked up the folder, his hands shaking slightly as he read. Mom, you've been meeting with her this whole time? Planning this? I was protecting you. No, he said quietly. You were trying to control me. Again. He looked up at me. What else haven't you told me? This was it. The moment to lay everything bare. Remember how I said I turned my father in? What I didn't tell you is why. I pulled out the final document Walter had given me. The money everyone thought I stole? I used it to repay his victims. All of it. Every penny I inherited, every asset I had. That's why I changed my name, not to hide, but to start over with nothing. Lorna grabbed the paper, her eyes widening as she read. This can't be. Your investigator won't find any hidden accounts or secret wealth, I continued. But he might find the thank you letters from the families I helped, or the testimony I gave that put my father away. I paused, my hand finally resting on my stomach. And now I need to protect my own family. Everett's eyes followed my movement, realization dawning on his face. Marin, I found out this morning, I said softly. Our baby deserves better than this endless suspicion and manipulation. So you need to choose, Everett. Both of you do. Lorna sank into the chair, the paper crumpling in her hands. You're pregnant.
Yes.
And unlike Camille's convenient claim, I can prove it. I turned to my husband. I love you, but I won't raise our child in this environment. Your mother needs help, Everett. Real help. Not enabling. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, a car door slammed and Walter's voice called out. Lorna? Are you ready to tell them the real reason you're so desperate to keep Everett close? I watched the color drain from my mother-in-law's face, and I realized we were about to uncover yet another layer of this family's carefully constructed facade. Whatever came next would either heal us or break us completely. But at least now, with my own secret revealed, I could face it honestly for my child's sake, if nothing else. Walter's words hung in the air as he entered our living room. The tension was thick enough to choke on, but Lorna's face, that's what caught my attention. Pure fear, something I'd never seen from her before. Don't, she whispered to Walter.
Please.
The pregnancy dinner is tomorrow, Walter said, ignoring her plea. Were you planning to serve that special cake you ordered? The one with the almond flour? My blood ran cold. Everett stepped forward. Mom, it's a family recipe, Lorna said quickly. I wanted to make something traditional to celebrate. To celebrate? Walter pulled out a receipt. Like you celebrated when you ordered that cake for Marin's birthday last year? The one that mysteriously got mixed up with a nut-free version at the last minute. I remembered that day, how Lorna had seemed almost disappointed when I didn't take a bite. How she'd insisted it was safe, but Walter had intercepted the plate. You knew about my allergies, I said softly. You knew exactly what almond flour would do to me. And now, Walter continued, with a grandchild on the way, were you hoping to prove Marin's allergies were fake? Or were you hoping for something worse? Everett's face had gone pale. Dad, what are you saying? I'm saying your mother has been testing Marin's allergies for years. Small doses, watching for reactions. Like some twisted scientific experiment. The room started spinning. All those times I'd felt sick after family dinners, the mysterious reactions that didn't make sense. I had to know. Lorna burst out. Had to prove she was lying like everything else about her. You don't understand. I can't lose him again. Again? Everett's voice cracked. What are you talking about? Walter moved to stand beside his wife. Tell him, Lorna. Tell him about the baby you lost before Everett. About how it broke you so badly you couldn't bear the thought of losing another child. I watched understanding dawn on Everett's face. The brother you told me died of SIDS. That wasn't the whole story, was it? Lorna's composure crumbled. I was allergic to the medication they gave me during the pregnancy. The doctors didn't believe me when I said something was wrong. By the time they listened, she turned to me, her eyes wild. When Everett brought home another woman with mysterious allergies, claiming she needed special treatment, special care. You thought I was faking, I finished. Like you thought the doctors thought you were faking. I had to protect him by poisoning his wife. Walter's voice was harsh. By trying to prove she's lying, even if it killed her? The doorbell rang, making us all jump. Through the window, I saw Camille standing on our porch, one hand resting demonstratively on her stomach. Perfect timing, I said, feeling strangely calm. Should we invite her in? Let her explain how she's supposedly carrying your child, Everett? Or should we skip straight to the part where your mother orchestrated this whole thing?
No.
Everett moved to block the door. No more manipulation. No more lies. He turned to his mother. You need help, Mom. Real help. Not whatever this is. I'm trying to save you. You're trying to control me. And now you're trying to hurt my wife, my pregnant wife, to prove some twisted point.
He pulled out his phone.
I'm calling Dr. Richards, the same psychiatrist who helped you after James died. Either you agree to get help or what? Lorna's voice was barely a whisper. Or you'll never meet your grandchild. The words seemed to physically pain him. Your real grandchild. The doorbell rang again. Outside, Camille was peering through the window, her face falling as she took in the scene. I placed a hand on my stomach, thinking about cycles of pain and protection, about how fear can twist love into something dangerous. The cake, I said quietly. The one for tomorrow's dinner. Where is it? Lorna's silence was answer enough. Because I'm thinking, I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, that we should all have a slice. Together.
Right now.
And see who's really telling the truth about what's inside it. The cake sat in the middle of the dining room table like a bomb waiting to detonate. Lorna had retrieved it from her car, her hands shaking as she set it down. Camille still stood in the doorway, her fabricated pregnancy story forgotten in the tension of the moment. You first, Lorna, I said, cutting a slice. Show us how safe your family recipe is. This is ridiculous, she whispered, but I saw the fear in her eyes. Is it? Because I have my EpiPen right here. I placed it next to the plate. And I've already texted photos of this whole situation to my lawyer. So, if anything happens to me, I let the threat hang in the air. Everett grabbed my arm.
Madam, stop.
You're pregnant. We can't risk. Can't risk what? I pulled away from him. Can't risk proving that your mother has been slowly poisoning me for years? That she was planning to do it again, even knowing I'm carrying your child. I never meant to, Lorna started.
To what?
Kill me? Just make me sick enough to prove I'm lying? My voice cracked. Do you know what it feels like, Lorna? When your throat closes up, when you can't breathe, and every second feels like drowning? Walter stepped forward. I have the receipt from the bakery. The order specifically requested almond flour. Stop. Lorna's voice was barely audible. Please, just stop.
Why?
I picked up the knife again. Isn't this what you wanted? To expose the truth. Camille cleared her throat from the doorway. I should go.
No.
I pointed the knife at her. You're part of this too. The fake pregnancy story? That was supposed to be the backup plan, wasn't it? If the cake didn't work? I needed the money, Camille admitted quietly. Lorna said. Enough. Everett's shout made us all jump. This ends now. Mom, eat the cake. Lorna stared at her son, tears streaming down her face. I lost one son. I couldn't lose another. So, you tried to kill my wife instead? I just wanted proof. She grabbed the fork, hands trembling.
Fine.
I'll show you. Everything happened in slow motion. Lorna lifted the fork to her mouth, but her hand was shaking so badly that crumbs fell onto her blouse. As she swallowed, her eyes went wide. Mom, Everett stepped toward her. Lorna's hand went to her throat. I can't breathe. Walter rushed to her side. Lorna, what's wrong? The medication, she gasped. My allergy to the new heart medication. My EpiPen clattered to the floor as realization hit. The same allergies she'd accused me of faking, she had them too. Different trigger, same result. Call 911, Walter shouted, lowering Lorna to the floor as she struggled for breath. I grabbed my EpiPen and knelt beside her. This will help, but it's going to hurt. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw everything. The fear, The guilt, the desperate need to protect what she loved, even if it meant destroying it. I saw myself in a twisted way. How thin the line was between protection and destruction. The EpiPen clicked as I pressed it into her thigh. Lorna's body jerked, her hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "I'm sorry," she whispered as the medication took effect. "I'm so sorry." Sirens wailed in the distance. Camille had disappeared, leaving the front door open. Everett stood frozen, watching his mother fight for breath on the floor, saved by the very person she'd tried to harm. "The baby," Lorna gasped. "Will you ever let me?" "That depends," I said, still holding her hand as the paramedics rushed in. "On whether you get help. Real help." As they loaded Lorna into the ambulance, I stared at the cake still sitting on the table. One bite had almost killed her. One bite would have killed me. The ultimate proof of truth, delivered in the cruelest way possible. Walter turned to me, his face aged 10 years in the last hour. "Why did you save her?" "Because," I said, watching the ambulance drive away, "sometimes the best revenge is forcing someone to live with what they've done." 3 days after the cake incident, I found myself sitting across from Lorna in the hospital's psychiatric ward. The room was stark white, making her look smaller, older somehow. The bruise from the EpiPen injection was still visible on her thigh. "Walter's leaving me," she said without preamble. Her voice was raw, whether from the allergic reaction or crying, I couldn't tell. "He's already packed his things." I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling the slight swell that only I could detect so far. "Did you ever actually check the ingredients in that cake? Or did you just assume I was lying about my allergies, like you assumed everything else?" She flinched. I was so sure that I was manipulating Everett, using my allergies to control him. I leaned forward. "The way you used your grief over James to control your family? You don't understand what it's like to lose a child." "No, but I understand what it's like to lose everything else." I pulled out an old photograph, me as Sarah Mitchell, standing next to my father at a charity gala. When I turned him in, I lost my name, my family, my entire identity. But I did it because it was right. Lorna's hands trembled as she took the photo. "Why are you here, Marin?" "Because I need to know if you're capable of change. Real change. Not just for Everett's sake, or this baby's, but for yourself." A nurse appeared in the doorway with medication, but Lorna waved her away. "I don't deserve another chance." "Maybe not. But this isn't about what you deserve." I stood up, moving to leave. "It's about breaking the cycle." "Wait." Her voice cracked. "There's something else you need to know. About James. About what really happened." I sat back down slowly, watching her face crumple. The allergic reaction? It wasn't just the medication. I'd been taking risks, eating things I shouldn't, trying to prove I wasn't really allergic, that the doctors were wrong. She wrapped her arms around herself. "When I got pregnant, I kept doing it, kept testing my limits, until understanding dawned, horrible and clear. You blamed yourself for James's death. And then Everett brought you home, with your careful food checks and medical alerts, and all I could see was myself. My weakness. The same weakness that killed my baby." Tears streamed down her face. "I had to prove you were faking. Had to prove it wasn't real. Because if your allergies were real, then you'd have to accept that yours were too," I finished. "That James's death wasn't because you were weak, but because no one believed you." A sound from the doorway made us both turn. Everett stood there, his face ashen. "Mom, how long have you been there?" Lorna whispered. "Long enough." He moved into the room, standing between us. "Why didn't you ever tell me the truth about James?" "Because I killed him. My pride, my stupidity." "No." I cut in sharply. "The doctors killed him when they dismissed your symptoms. The same way you tried to dismiss mine." Silence filled a room, heavy with decades of unspoken pain. Finally, Everett spoke. "I'm staying with Marin at her house. Walter's moving in with his brother." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But there's a treatment program in Vermont. 6 months, specialized in trauma and anxiety. They have experience with patients who have severe allergies." Lorna's eyes darted between us. You'd let me come back? After everything? Not come back, I said firmly. Start over. But only if you do the work. Only if you face what really happened with James and what you tried to do to me. And the baby? I touched my stomach again. Will know their grandmother when she's ready to be known. Really known, not hidden behind walls of control and fear. As we left the hospital, Everett took my hand. You're either the most forgiving person I've ever met or the most strategic. I thought about cycles of pain, about how revenge and healing sometimes look remarkably similar. Maybe both, I said. Maybe that's what breaking the cycle takes. Behind us, through the hospital window, I could see Lorna watching us leave, one hand pressed against the glass. This time, when she reached for her medication, she didn't wave the nurse away. 6 months later, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing my dress over my now visible baby bump. The Vermont Treatment Center had called yesterday. Lorna was completing her program, and they wanted to arrange a supervised family session. Ready? Everett asked from the doorway. In his hands was a small box we'd received that morning from Lorna. I nodded, and he opened it. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a note. I found this in my mother's attic. It explains so much, maybe too much. The journal belonged to Lorna's mother, detailing her own struggles with control and fear. The last entry, dated just before her death, was an unfinished letter to Lorna. My darling daughter, I'm sorry for teaching you that love means control, for making you believe that protecting someone means owning them. She's breaking the cycle, I said quietly, touching the worn pages. Really breaking it. Walter met us at the treatment center, looking years younger despite the divorce proceedings. She's different, he said as we walked in. Really different. The family session room was bright, with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Lorna sat already waiting, her hands folded in her lap. The first thing I noticed was her medical alert bracelet, identical to mine. I've been baking, she said after we settled in the center's kitchen. They have protocols for allergen safety. She smiled slightly. Turns out I'm quite good at it when I'm not trying to prove something. Mom. Everett started, but she held up her hand. Let me finish. I've learned something important here. She took a deep breath. Control isn't protection. What I did, to James, to you, Marin, to this family, it wasn't about keeping anyone safe. It was about not feeling powerless. The therapist nodded encouragingly, and Lorna continued. I found these in my mother's things. She pulled out a stack of letters. She did the same things to me that I did to you, Everett. Made me doubt myself. Used my weaknesses against me. Called it love. Her voice cracked. But it's not love. It's fear. I touched my stomach as the baby kicked. Lorna's eyes followed the movement. I'd like to be part of your child's life, she said softly. Not as the controlling grandmother who needs to fix everything, but as someone who understands what it means to be different. To need protection sometimes, but not control. We'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. But we need to know this change is real. It is. She pulled out another letter, newer. I wrote to Camille's brother. He's agreed to repay Everett what he lost in the investment scam. It won't fix what I did, using Camille to hurt you both, but it's a start, Everett finished. After the session, as we walked through the center's garden, I found myself alone with Lorna. She stopped by a bench, touching the medical alert bracelet. You know what the hardest part was? She asked. Accepting that you and I are more alike than different. Both of us changed our names, running from our past. Both of us living with invisible threats. Both of us. Survivors, I finished. Not victims. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I named him James because it means supplanter, someone who takes another's place. I was so afraid of being replaced, I nearly destroyed everything trying to prevent it. I took her hand, placing it on my stomach where the baby was kicking. This little one? We're naming her Hope. Later that night, as Everett and I lay in bed, he asked, Do you really trust her change? I thought about the journal, about cycles of fear and control, about how healing sometimes requires walking through the darkest parts of ourselves. I trust that she's trying, I said finally. And sometimes that's the bravest thing we can do. On our nightstand sat the last page of Lorna's mother's letter, its final lines hauntingly familiar. The greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's learning when to let go. The baby kicked again, and I smiled, thinking about names and changes and the future we were building, not despite our scars, but because of them. Some cycles, it turns out, are meant to be broken.